Now that we've covered the first half of both the original and the remake of Resident Evil 2, it's time to check out the rest of both games. Everything after the RPD section. What's that? You haven't watched part 1 of this episode? No problem, you should click the link in the pinned comment down below and watch that first. Don't worry, I'll be right here waiting. The rest of you, sit back and enjoy part 2. We'll dissect both the RE2 games and finish it off with a fascinating look into the never-released alternate version of RE2 known as Resident Evil 1.5, as well as checking out some very interesting stuff that was cut from the remake. Claire wakes up to Dr. Annette Birkin taking notes on the elevator accident. Annette has taken Sherry to safety and tells Claire to f*** off basically. However, Annette's definition of safety is a bit skewed as she has dumped her in some pile of garbage. Talk about great parenting, eh? Oh yeah, forgot to mention that Annette is Sherry's mother. Claire now needs to find a way inside the garbage room and rescue Sherry. Leon and Ada run into Annette down here as well, and our boy ends up getting shot and wounded. Annette escapes and we take control of Ada as she attempts to catch up to her. At one point, Annette nearly burns Ada alive inside an incinerator, but she's able to escape with the use of her 007 style gadget. Soon after, Ada catches up to Annette on a bridge, but gets knocked down into the same garbage room where Sherry was trapped in Claire's scenario. She gets impaled with a piece of debris and now her only hope is Leon. Ada's segment in the vanilla game ended with Annette recognizing her daughter's pendant and failing to retrieve it, getting thrown over a railing instead. Ada then learns that the locket contains a sample of the G-virus. The sewers section has been greatly expanded upon in the remake. It went from a relatively short, linear area to a multi-story, intricate sewage system. The enemies you faced in the original were mostly zombies and the giant venomous spiders that have been cut in the remake. They've been replaced with these nasty-looking G-adults that can be rather tricky to deal with. Like the spiders, they're toxic and you'll need a blue herb if they manage to infect you. The original did feature one instance of fighting the G-adult at the sewers entrance. What you're mainly doing in the two make sewers is looking for these chess pieces required for a door that leads to Sherry and Ada. They're scattered all around the elaborate sewage system, so you'll be trekking through a lot of literal shit. The chess piece door was in the old game too, but it was located earlier in the sewers. And there you just had to pop the pieces into their slots in any order. In the remake you'll have to place the pieces into specific slots based on a riddle. Another example of the puzzles receiving an overhaul, making them more interesting. In any case, once you solve the puzzle, you'll get attacked by the G-mutant again. And in this boss battle you have to knock him off a platform with a container. Pretty cool. Now for the previously mentioned chemical plant, aka the abandoned factory that was cut in the remake. It was a location after the sewers that you'd pass through on the way to the underground laboratory complex. To be honest, it's a very short part of the game and mostly consists of narrow, linear corridors. The most memorable part about this place is that it made a return in Resident Evil 0, so it would have been cool to get to see it again in the remake. Apparently it was planned for the player to reach the factory taking a cable car into the mountains. But that idea was scrapped in favor of an underground cavern taking the player straight to Nest. In RE2 Vanilla, you lower the massive turntable cargo elevator with a train carriage from the factory down into the labs. On the way down, the G-mutant ambushes the train, severely injuring Ada and initiating yet another boss fight. But let's go back to the remake sewers. Having rescued Ada and Sherry in Leon and Claire's respective scenarios, we take a cable car straight to Umbrella's secret underground research facility known as Nest. Sherry is suffering from the G-virus infection, so Claire needs to obtain a vaccine for her. As for Leon's motives, Ada claims that if he can help her recover a G-virus sample, she can stop a potential outbreak should things go south. Leon is head over heels at this point, so he agrees to help the wounded lady. Nest was great in both games. I love the darker, rustier, industrial look of the original, but the remake's brighter and cleaner look is also quite stunning. Naturally, we have to explore the entire place, gradually upgrading our wristband to gain access to more and more restricted parts of the facility. You'll square off against a bunch of zombies and lickers, but the prominent enemy down here is Plant 43, otherwise known as Ivy. An experimental bioweapon. One of your tasks is to develop a herbicide for it, all while facing off against its offspring. Leon's flamethrower makes quick work of them and Claire can use her grenade launcher, ideally with flame rounds. Claire also has the spark shot, which has got to be one of the most satisfying weapons in any game ever. It's shockingly good. Get it? Shocking. There are also a few good cases of the zapping system at work here. The vines in the sleeping quarters, if burned in the A scenario, will not appear in B. Additionally, if you activate the BOW gas in A, enemies become weaker. However, in the B run, they will be poisonous due to the prolonged exposure to the gas. And finally, there's this laboratory that requires 2 fingerprints to open, so it can only be opened in the B scenario, but only if you registered your fingerprint in the A scenario as well. Getting the SMG from that lab was pretty satisfying. Anyhow, instead of developing the vaccine for Sherry's run like in the original, the remake has you developing a herbicide for the ivy plant. It's a similar process, so the overall objectives don't differ too much. Once we poison the plant, we'll gain access to the restricted west area where we can find the G-Virus as Leon or use Sherry's pendant to acquire the devil vaccine as Claire.
Hell yeah. Got it.
On our way back, we run into Annette and learn that she and her husband, Dr. William Birkin, used to run the facility and are responsible for developing the G-Virus.
She is my creation!
William is also one of the leading scientists behind the T-Virus. He had a falling out with Umbrella after failing to achieve a promotion as a corporate executive, and subsequently entered negotiations with the US military. Umbrella HQ was not too keen on this news and sent out an Umbrella Security Service squad to forcibly confiscate the virus first. Upon their arrival, William, in his attempt to resist the USS Alpha Team, was promptly gunned down.
This is my life's work. I'm not handing over anything. Hold your fire!
They retrieved the case of T and G samples and left for the sewers toward their extraction point. William, on his dying breath, injected himself with a remaining G sample and transformed into the horrifying monstrosity known as the G-Mutant. Blinded by revenge, he followed the Alpha Team into the sewers, where he either killed or seriously injured all of them. Except for Hunk. He ate the remaining G samples to ensure that none of them were at risk of theft, and destroyed samples of T. This ended with rats in the sewers consuming the T samples and spreading the infection into the city's water supply. And the rest is, as they say, history. Unlike the T-Virus mutants, those infected with the G-Virus are highly fertile and are driven by instinct to asexually reproduce, especially with beings closest to them in DNA. So that's your explanation for why he sought after Sherry all this time. As his offspring, she was the most viable carrier for his parasitic larvae. Damn it, Capcom, what the f***? Birkin survived the fall from the last fight, and he's back for some more. Now mutated into his G3 form, he delivers a devastating blow to Annette, causing internal hemorrhaging. Boss battle ensues, and we manage to put him down with a ton of firepower. Following the fight, Claire and Annette rush to the security room to vaccinate Sherry. Sadly, Annette dies as Sherry starts to recover, and they say their final goodbye. In Leon's run after the G3 battle, Annette explains to him that Ada is a spy sent by an unknown rival organization to steal the G-Virus sample. Leon is in disbelief and acts like he knows Ada, despite the fact that they've only known each other for like, what, a few hours?
That's bullshit.
Anyway, he rushes out and she's waiting for him. Leon, now doubtful, confronts her and she pulls a gun on him.
Why couldn't you just hand over the sample?
So that's all this was? I was just some pawn to you?
Look, I'm just doing my job.
And I'm doing mine, so drop that damn gun! I'm taking you in. And you shoot me.
Take care of yourself, Leon.
No!
Ada falls to the bottom of the facility, along with a G-virus sample. Our boy is heartbroken, but there's no time for tears as the facility's self-destruct system has been activated. Our protagonists take the main express lift down to the underground train yard and then take separate routes at the bottom. Claire and Sherry find the train and lower it to the rail below. On the way down, William Birkin comes back from the dead yet again. Now as G4. Nothing dies down here, damn it. Luckily, we're packing a minigun and unload on him with everything we got. Sherry, close your eyes. Meanwhile, Leon is being chased by the tyrant. He locates a cargo lift that goes down to the same platform that Claire and Sherry are heading to and faces off against the tyrant mano a mano. He's shirtless now, so you know he means business. I'm digging the design for the super tyrant, even though he seems to have lost a claw from the original. After whooping his ass for a while, Ada tosses a rocket launcher Leon's way that he uses to annihilate Mr. X. How the hell did Ada survive that fall? At last, Leon reaches the train and is reunited with Claire. It looks like they survived the nightmare. But wait, what was that? The B scenario character goes to examine and is met with a massive blob of flesh, limbs, eyes, tentacles, and teeth. Lots of teeth. William Birkin in his fifth and final form as the G5. He has absorbed the surrounding bodies to sustain himself and mutate into this mess of a thing. It's time to unload whatever ammo you've been saving. Hours upon hours of scavenging and item management, all led up to this definitive, cathartic release. In the end, the carriage is detached and Birkin is consumed by the flames erupting from Nest. Outside the tunnel, the train comes to a halt and the trio goes for a walk in the sun. It's a heartwarming scene of the characters planning the future. They vow to stick together and put an end to Umbrella once and for all. The labs in the original offered more variety between Claire and Leon's runs from a gameplay perspective, with certain sections of the area only accessible in the B scenario, while in the remake the two runs are virtually identical. Story-wise, the dissimilarities are fewer between the two games, but a few things are worth mentioning. At one point, Ada came back to rescue Leon from Mr. X, sacrificing herself in the process, and even confessing her love to him. Leon was also responsible for going after Sherry as Claire was busy preparing the vaccine and fighting William. They would reunite at an emergency train where Leon had to restore power and activate the train, followed immediately by a fight against Mr. X. Sherry would get vaccinated on the train as the group evacuates the area. Like in the remake, G in his final form would follow them and then get incinerated in similar fashion. Likewise, the final scene is more or less the same, only a bit cheesier. Claire intends to keep searching for her brother Chris, setting up the events of Code Veronica. Leon is ready to take out Umbrella. Ada is implied to have survived with the G-Virus pendant in her possession. Claire A and Leon B are canon in the original game, and that is why I've summarized those scenarios in more detail. There are a few significant differences if we reverse it to Leon A and Claire B instead. In Leon A, he arrives to the station first, so he takes the path through Kendo's shop and eventually meets Marvin. He runs into Claire in the STAR's office and largely goes through the same events that Claire went through in her A scenario. that includes not ever encountering the Tyrant and mainly facing off against the G-Mutant. He still has his subplot with Ada, but there are some slight changes in the lab section. Annette is encountered in a different corridor where she gets absolutely destroyed. She later shoots Ada on this bridge in a scene that is a lot more like the Remake's version of this event. As for Claire B, again it's basically switched roles with Leon B, apart from her subplot with Sherry and Chief Irons of course. This time the Tyrant will be stalking her and Sherry instead, as one of his missions is to recover the G-Virus sample inside Sherry's pendant. Sherry never gets infected in this scenario. Later at Nest, Claire's goal is to find Sherry and rescue her from the Tyrant, which she does in the end by tossing the pendant into the lava pit. On the train, the roles are reversed, so Claire will now fight and defeat G in his final form. Now that we've thoroughly examined both games, it's time we went back to where it all originated. When I found out that there's a playable version of an early build of RE2, I had to get my hands on it immediately. Now, this specific build is very much unfinished, only about 40% complete, so everything is not working properly and it's filled with bugs and glitches. Known among fans as Resident Evil 1.5, it still offers a fascinating insight into the RE2 we never got. So, let's check out the game that producer Shinji Mikami described as dull and boring. Wait, now that I think about it, that might not be the best way to promote this segment. So, here we are in the original RPD. As you can see, there's virtually no resemblance to the extravagant art museum style building we know today. It was more of a modern and realistic design, and had a darker, colder vibe to it. Director Hideki Kamiya said it felt too modern and strangely sterile. And I have to say, exploring these hallways and offices, it's hard to disagree with those descriptions. Having said that, I didn't hate this version of the station. It was surprisingly delightful getting a glimpse of what could have been. Going with an entirely alternate style for the station meant that most of the assets from the original couldn't be recycled, as they would feel out of place in the more artistic building of the retail version. You'll also notice that majority of the items you're seeing on screen now were different. It was almost as if they were trying to take the series in a different direction, and a lot of what we today consider traditional Resident Evil stuff like the herbs and the ink ribbons were missing. Phones and computers were used to save progress, and the character even makes fun of the idea of using a typewriter. The story bears some similarities to the retail version, but was reworked when a professional screenwriter was brought onto the project. The initial script was written by the director Hideki Kamiya himself, who was young at the time and inexperienced as a writer. Noboru Sugimura was hired to rework the script, but suggested that they were better off scrapping the entire project and starting from scratch. Originally, the Umbrella Corporation was shut down after the events of the first game, as part of a story arc that would see the US military striving to acquire the G-Virus and becoming the main antagonist of the game. The two protagonists were Leonskennedy and Elza Walker. Leon's character was largely the same, though the game would start with him already at the station, defending it from the mutated populace. He did go through his fair share of redesigns, sporting a shorter haircut with casual clothing in one of them, and with a trusty companion by his side in another, before finally settling into his sturdy uniform. Fun fact, Leon was initially meant to start the game in his civilian attire and change into his uniform while speaking to his superior Marvin, but the scene ended up getting cut due to technical difficulties with the CG. Seeing as how the entire city had fallen, putting on a uniform was not a necessity, but it was an important scene as it would demonstrate Leon's determination to protect the city and his principles. It's pretty cool that that exact scene was later added to the RE2 make. The other protagonist, Elza Walker, was a college student and a motorcycle racer, an early version of Claire with more or less an identical backstory. On her way back to Raccoon City from a vacation, she'd stumble into the outbreak and end up crashing her bike through the front gates of the station. Her motorcycle suit was made available in the remake as an alternate outfit, which I thought was pretty neat. Elza later became Claire Redfield, sister of Chris Redfield from the first game, as a way to tie the two games together. Their respective scenarios were two completely independent stories and not a single story shown through multiple perspectives like in retail. It was a lot of work to intertwine the two narratives, but Kamiya was stubborn in that that's what he wanted to do with Resident Evil 2, and Sugimura had to eventually concede. Kamiya's other wish was to take a more over-the-top, Hollywood-style cinematic approach with the presentation to attract more customers, which ended up paying off as the original RE2 is the franchise's best-selling game on a single platform. 1.5 featured additional encounters with other survivors, such as Leon's supervising officer Roy, who curiously looks a lot like him. Other characters were heavily rewritten. Marvin, for instance, was to play a much bigger role in the story, and Ada used to be an Umbrella researcher wearing a lab coat. They would both be paired with Leon and would accompany him throughout the course of his story. Elsa had her own pair of sidekicks in Sherry and John, who later became Robert Kendo. Unlike his corrupt, sadistic serial killer character in Retail, Brian Irons used to be an ally to the player, a heroic veteran police officer who'd end up sacrificing himself to help the player escape. Boy, he went through quite a transformation, didn't he? There was a scenario that was planned where you'd revisit the ruins of the Spencer Mansion, and they had even begun drawing concept art for the location. It was supposed to be at the beginning of the game before you arrived to Raccoon City, but it ended up getting cut early on. Much like the Retail game, the locations you visited throughout 1.5 were the RPD, the sewers, the chemical plant, and the research facility. The most recognizable among them was the research facility, which had a very similar layout and overall look. The rest were all pretty much completely dissimilar. These areas would be filled with a greater number of enemies on screen at once, made possible by the far lower number of polygons used to render them. Reportedly, zombies had more variety in appearance as well, with fat zombies and multiple female zombies mixed in. And they were to be far more relentless. Other notable enemies include a different breed of dog, small crocodiles accompanying the large alligator, and two enemies that never made it into any RE game, the man spider and the infected gorillas. There was one very crucial detail that they nailed in the original and was overlooked in Retail, and that is, the original RPD had toilets. That's right, the officers weren't forced to work an entire shift holding it in. Still, not nearly as cool as the clogged up toilet in the remake, which had flooded the entire East Wing corridor. And that's all I've got on this Lost Gem. Like I said, the playable version is only about 40% complete, but a group of dedicated fans are hard at work restoring the game, and they've made a lot of progress already. I was able to play through the entire thing, which as far as I know was not possible before. Legend has it that a nearly finished build is somewhere out there in the world. Sadly, we might not ever get to play it. So it's up to the fans now to restore the 40% build and perhaps one day give us all a fully playable version. There are a few things that were cut from the remake too that I want to mention real quick. Some enemies didn't make it in as the developers felt that they didn't mesh with the more realistic world. The giant spiders, crows, evolved lickers, and the giant moth were all cut. None of these enemies were prominently featured in the original. The spiders appeared in the short underground section. Crows ambushed you in a single corridor. It was a decent jump scare though. Evolved lickers were basically just a reskin of the regular lickers, and the giant moth only appeared in one office at the labs. I do feel that some of these should have made it into the game. The evolved lickers, for example, were lickers that Umbrella did further engineering on at the labs. I don't see how including them would affect the realism at all. The giant moth, complete with all of the eggs and nasty shit surrounding it, would have been cool to see in the new engine. The spiders, I don't really care either way, but they are kind of trademark RE enemies at this point, so I would have liked to have seen at least one or two as a throwback if nothing else. Finally, the crows bursting in through the windows, again, just put them in as a throwback and to spice things up a little. Oh yeah, almost forgot. There were also these cockroaches inside the ventilation shaft. They make a return in the remake, but are not hostile towards the player. There was a fun Easter egg in the original where you could meet a zombified Brad Vickers outside the station. Brad Vickers was the Alpha Team pilot in the original. He'd appear outside the station if you managed to get there without killing anything or picking up any items. It took a lot of bullets to drop him, but if you did, he'd leave a special key for you that you could later use on a locker inside the department, granting you access to some badass fits. In Claire's case, she'd even get a 6-shooter revolver. Unfortunately, this Easter egg wasn't included in the remake, but it makes sense why if we take the RE3 remake into account. My real issue is that this badass outfit wasn't included either. Oh well, we did get some decent outfits for both characters anyway, so I'll forgive them for that one. There is a poster of Brad in the same place where you'd find him in the original. An Easter egg that did make it in though is the secret film you could obtain from Wesker's desk at the STARS office. In the original you had to examine his desk 50 times to get a hidden undeveloped film. In the remake you'd unlock the desk and get a special item first. If you examine it again, you get a hidden film. Here's the thing though, the game doesn't prompt you to examine the desk a second time, so I missed it on my first run. When developed, the film shows a young new recruit from the Bravo team. Going back to canned ideas, a couple of new enemy types were cut too. Alternate zombies like this one in a wheelchair were planned, or this disgusting thing that seems to be a licker in early stages of mutation. Perhaps the most interesting was the Condemned, a horrifying humanoid enemy type that would chase Sherry around the orphanage. It was later suggested that it'd be scarier having the Mad Chief Irons after the player, and the team liked that idea better. On some of the concept art, we can see an alternate design for the orphanage itself with various rooms that were not present in the retail version. Here we can see different versions of Kendo's gun shop and get a glimpse into the heartbreaking reality behind those closed doors. Browsing the concept art, a couple of other changes caught my attention. Like the color scheme in the sewers seems a lot more distinct in these images. Kinda wish they went with this look, to be honest. The version we got in the end seems a bit dull in comparison. Here are some cool shots of what the labs could have looked like. Very similar to the final design overall, but interesting nonetheless. Looks like they were even planning to include the lower levels of the facility at some point, with the lava containers, as well as the massive Plant 43 growing from the depths below, more in line with how it was in the original. The developers have also talked about how they were experimenting with a longer section before arriving to the RPD. Again, some of these areas looked a lot more similar to the OG game. I feel that an extended stroll to the station demonstrating the damage and devastation of Raccoon City would have benefited the remake greatly. Yes, some of those areas were moved to a later point in the game, but it would have been nice to see a bit more of the city and the chaos outside before arriving to the station, so that once we do arrive, we feel a true sense of being stuck inside from all the chaos outside. Lastly, let's talk about the UI, which the devs supposedly worked on for over a year. It seems that they were trying to seamlessly implement the old school design into the modern game. They experimented with having the pixelated UI built into an in-game device. I really like this one, and the idea in general is cool, but my OCD brain will always prefer the clean, minimalist look they ultimately went with. It's not for nothing that the name Resident Evil still means something in the gaming industry. Capcom are not afraid to take chances, and restarting development on RE2 in 1997 is a perfect illustration of that. It's tough decisions like that that have kept the series relevant for over 2 decades. I imagine taking on the task of remaking a universally beloved game like Resident Evil 2 was an equally demanding and intimidating task. Luckily for us, the team working on the project consisted of fans of the original that understood how important the game was to a lot of people and did everything in their power to recreate the game faithfully and to the best of their ability. Listening to the developers describe the work that went into every minute decision, it's not surprising that the end product is nothing short of incredible, and dare I say it, even outshines the original. I'm so pleased that it was made using the RE engine and that it came out when it did. The game benefits immensely from all of the cutting-edge technological advancements. Obviously, it looks stunning and the atmosphere is on point. The gameplay is super smooth, responsive and satisfying, which makes exploration of the unsettling but gorgeous environments really a joyous experience. Of course, it's partly due to the amazing level design and a neatly interconnected map as well. I loved the attention to detail both in the original and the remake. Small details like Sherry's pendant bouncing around when she runs, or how she'd hold Claire's hand when standing idle, or how the characters would limp when severely injured, or how every single item was rendered in painstaking detail in the remake. 2 games, 20 years apart, both equally impressive for its time. Now that's rare.
Marvin! Oh no. Damn it! I'll stop this, Lieutenant. I promise.
In a game as technologically advanced as this, it was only natural to bring in some serious acting talent and finally deliver some quality performances. The cast did a great job in making these characters likable, and the facial animations are some of the best in the industry. The soundtrack definitely deserves some praise, specifically the original soundtrack, which is truly iconic in every sense of the word. The music was to convey desperation as the underlying theme and featured different styles depending on the environment. From ambient horror music to industrial pieces, there's nothing quite like the ominous piano underscores when you enter the RPD. It's just flawless. The remake's OST is not bad by any means, but it doesn't quite match the original sound. As I mentioned earlier, the remake is scarier due to the darker atmosphere and outstanding visuals. Even Hideki Kamiya, the original's director, has gone on record saying that he was surprised by how scary the remake really is. He pointed out that zombies look almost too real now, and I'm inclined to agree. They've never looked more convincing than here, and their groans and movement is rather disturbing too. That's true with other enemy types too, such as the Lickers, looking slimier than ever. Combined with the sensational gore system, and you have a game that'll surely keep you coming back for more. Replaying again after having unlocked infinite ammo was ridiculously fun. Absolutely annihilating everything in your path without a care in the world was a different kind of fun. Nothing beats that first run, but knowing exactly where to go, what to do, which zombies will rise, etc. was rewarding as hell, so I kept going back and even got all of the achievements. There's something extremely satisfying about learning the ins and outs of the map and locations of every item. Places and enemies that were once anxiety-inducing are no longer matched to your skill and equipment, so going back and blazing through the game like a Terminator, destroying everything, just makes you feel like a conqueror. I beat the original 4 times in back-to-back playthroughs as well, which speaks volumes to how well it holds up to this day. If there's one thing I would change, is expanding on the extra modes a little. There's a few what-if type scenarios that I found pretty underwhelming. I wish these scenarios were story-driven with actual voice acting and plot development. They're based on interesting premises, but in their current state they're just not anything special. The No Way Out mode was some good challenging fun though. Having to hold out in this small gas station as hordes of enemies swarm in was thrilling. They've also brought back the Forced Survivor and the Tofu Survivor modes. Not really my scene though. My first experience with Resident Evil 2 was the remake, so I might be a bit biased in my love for it. I've had nothing but good things to say because honestly, it instantly became one of my favorite games of all time. I'm really glad that I went back to the original 2 though, as that was not the plan initially, but it was certainly worth my time. Both games are brilliant, and I did my best in providing a fair and rational analysis for why I prefer the remake. The developers clearly put a lot of thought into the changes that were implemented so that it can stand on its own while simultaneously staying true to the original. Ever since Capcom famously announced to the world, "We do it," back in 2015, fans were both excited and understandably skeptical. Coming off of the disappointing mess that was RE6, it wasn't obvious that they still had it in them. It brings me great joy to say that Resident Evil 2 2019 lives up to its name and is now one of Capcom's best-selling and highest-rated games. In a time of shitty remakes and cash-grab remasters, it stands out as something that has been clearly crafted with love, respect, and passion. They did it.